Hi there, this is Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. My name is Ian Willoughby. My guest this time out is Osamu Okamura. Osamu was born in Tokyo to Japanese-Czech parents, but moved to Prague while still an infant. An architect by profession, he's involved in a wide slew of activities, from academic work to popularising the concept of livable cities among the general public. The Okamura family name is well known in Czechia, largely thanks to his brother Tomio, who heads a leading anti-EU political party, while a second sibling, Hayato, is also an MP. And Osamu Okamura and I will get into those brothers soon in this edition of Prague Talk. You were born to a Czech mother and a Japanese father in the 70s, and I'm curious, how did your parents meet?
That's a long story, but they met through writing letters in English to each other, so it was like kind of pen pal tradition. My dad wanted to improve his English, so he sent his addresses to the Europe, trying to find someone who would exchange letters in English with him. And because my mom, she was at the time teenager at the high school, and she was also starting to study English, so she just got the address and she tried to reply, and then they started exchange letters. So it was in, let's say, turn 50s, 60s, right? There was not such a much contact between the socialist or communist countries and Western Europe, while Japan had a very special position in there, because Japan was not like typical imperialist country, as the communists said. They were actually kind of also occupied by the American army in the time. There were a lot of protests, there were a lot of left movement. So there was also a lot of connections, culture connections, political connections between the Soviet bloc and Japan, surprisingly. So they started to exchange letters, and then my dad realized he wants to study German, so he came to Germany, and at the time he visited my mom in Prague, and then my oldest brother was born in Prague.
You moved to Czechoslovakia in the mid-70s at the age of around 3, and I'm very curious if you have any memories of your life in Japan from before you came here.
I was too young to have really vivid memories. I only can somehow recall some memories of our apartment, just very little bit, maybe of the nearby metro station, but that was all.
And have you spent much time as an adult in Japan?
I went regularly for summer holidays, I would say, because I was always studying in Prague, working in Prague, so there was no much other time to visit Japan and in the summer in between my studies. And very recently, I've been also involved in teaching at the Tokyo University of Science, and that was, for me, it was really surprising a little bit, or I would say rewarding, because we were leaving from Tokyo, from Japan, the most advanced country in the time, to communist Czechoslovakia, like almost 50 years ago, and now I was invited to teach, I would say, basically Czech architect, to teach Japanese about livable cities, and that's really satisfying, right?
When you moved here as a child, probably there were a few kids around with such colourful backgrounds as yours. I guess you stood out. Was it tough being a kid here in the 70s in communist Czechoslovakia?
Of course, the first moment, because I look a little bit different, people were maybe not sure, where I'm coming from. But after a while, especially as my classmates, friends, this completely disappeared. So sometimes I was even surprised. Someone asked me something about Japan or Asia, because I completely erased this from my mental kind of perception. So it didn't happen so often in the childhood, very rarely actually. But after that, when I got, for example, to the university, there were more and more people coming to me, asking me about some specific questions about Japanese culture, architecture, arts. So and then I realized I'm missing a little bit this because I wanted to help them, to advise them, to give them some good answers. So I started to study a little bit more about Japanese culture, because since I grew up in Prague, I didn't have so much knowledge about Japanese culture and architecture and so on. So I studied a lot, and then I ended up doing lectures about Japanese culture and architecture and so on. And that was the start of my, let's say, public career.
It's quite well known that your brother Tomio Okamura spent some time in some kind of a children's home when he was a child. Did you also?
Yes, we were there together. The oldest brother, he stayed with grandparents, because we are three brothers, and our mom, because there was so much stress, because she moved with us alone to Czechoslovakia. Our dad was supporting us from a far away distance and only visiting once or twice a year. And it was really stressful. And so in that moment, in that certain moment, our mom collapsed, and she was she had to get some treatments, in the hospital, and so that's why the grandparents, they couldn't take care of all three of us. So it was a really, really, let's say, critical moment. But because I was in this home together with my older brother Tomio, I didn't see it like very problematic for me, because I was there with him, and so it was kind of I had a sense of family and security and safety and so on. While he speaks about it a little bit differently.
Years later, you studied architecture at the Czech Technical University. Also, I was reading, you studied at the Academy of Fine Arts. What were you doing at the latter institution? Why did you also go to the Academy of Fine Arts?
Yes, I started at the Technical University, and somehow I really tended to look at architecture in a more complex way, not just as a technological issue or a technological challenge, but in more, like, I would say, cultural, social, political maybe. And so then I found the understanding of architecture as being taught at the Technical University a little bit limiting, and that's why I applied for my master to the Academy of Fine Arts. It was like something that definitely impressed me a lot, but after a while, actually, my professor, he realized that he advised me to switch to the intermediate art, because he saw I have some aspirations to go even more interdisciplinary way, and then I continued with Milan Knížák and I graduated with Miloš Šejn.
Well, I wanted to ask you about Milan Knížák, because he's quite a controversial character. On one hand, he's quite widely disliked for the way that he ran the National Gallery in Prague. On the other hand, he was a very cool artist. He was part of the Fluxus movement with people like Yoko Ono. How did you find Knížák?
I think he was a very good pedagogue, very good teacher. So he really tried to push your boundaries. And he was also very humane, in this interaction. So it was like very provocative all the time. Only I got to his studio at the very end of my studies, and I already knew what I want. So I was not really already that easy to model, or
malleable.
So I was really resisting his methods. That's why it didn't work much, So he very carefully looked at what you are doing and how passionately you are doing it, and then he gave you completely opposite tasks just to challenge you, and I hated it. It didn't work with me, but definitely it was a method how to make you sure that you are doing what you are doing, like fully and full-heartedly, I would say.
In your architecture career, you haven't focused so much on designing buildings as such, but mainly you've been active in other areas. You've been a university dean, lecturer, writer. You edited an architectural journal for many years. You have been involved in efforts to raise public understanding of architecture and urban planning. You've taken part in art projects and urban festivals. You've done media work. Why have you chosen to focus on the kind of educational side of architecture?
I see the role of architecture much wider than just constructing buildings, and even that is the substantial part of it for me. But on top of it, of course, the architecture, it's not just bricks and houses, but it's people and the relations between them that are being imprinted into the physical matter. And then I'm really interested in how these relationships between the let's say material world and the virtual world, or the relations in between people, how they correspond, how they function or not. And that's, I think, is definitely experience from my childhood and from the different cultures and different modes of living on this planet, because the Asian or Japanese view on how things should work, it's very often quite different from the European one.
About Prague and architecture in Prague, I think many people are interested in this. If we look at the architecture that's been built here in the last few decades, basically since the fall of communism, has Prague got a lot of decent new buildings? Has the architecture developed well here in those decades, in your view?
So recently I've been editing a special issue of Romanian Architecture magazine about the last developments of architecture in Czech Republic and Prague. And I have to admit that I had not much to say about architecture in Prague, because there is not so much happening in terms of high quality architecture that I would find inspiring. But most of it is happening outside of Prague, in small centers all around the country, and it's due to the, let's say, fastly spreading practice of having employed the so-called municipal architect and many municipalities, and it could be one person coming once a week, or once in 2 weeks for consultations, up to offices of dozens of people we can find in bigger cities. And these people usually develop some strategies how to make the cities more livable, and also prepare architecture competitions and tackle the issues that are kind of public projects. And so I have found recently a lot of beautiful community houses, libraries, primary schools buildings. It's very, very typical recently. And galleries, museums. The Plato Gallery in Ostrava, that is one of the prime examples, because it got selected to the Mies van der Rohe Prize, or Mies van der Rohe Award. That's the award for the best European architecture. And it got shortlisted to the top 5 in whole Europe.
Is that the former abattoir?
Yes, in Ostrava. It was transformed into the contemporary art gallery on the basis of architecture competition. It was not even a Czech architect, and that's another layer to it, because the proposal that was actually not the winning one even, but was the third place, but there are some, like discussions and so on. So it's by Polish architect, and so it brings another dimension to the cross-national cooperation in Europe.
One issue, perhaps marginal seeming issue connected with architecture and urban planning, is global warming. Is Prague doing enough in that area? For example, I live near Jiřího Poděbrad. Now, when they're redeveloping the square, there's going to be a lot more trees, which will help in the summers. But in general, is Prague doing enough in that area?
I believe so. I think Prague is not doing badly, but of course, the revitalization of the river is very important. Then designing the squares, taking proper care of the parks. But what I'm a great critic of is a lack of trees in the streets at some neighborhoods. For example, in Vinohrady, where you live, it's not the case. But in the other neighborhoods, like Žižkov, Smíchov, or Nusle, where I live, we don't have really alleys of trees in the streets, and when it gets really hot in summer, it's unbearable hot. So the city doesn't cool down even in the night, because it radiates the heat that it has accumulated during the day. And even my windows are to the north, and I don't have a direct sun. I can't really sleep. It's so hot there.
Another issue, of course, with architecture and Prague is what to do with the socialist era buildings. For example, right behind us here on Vinohradska, there was the Transgas building that was demolished. I know the mayor of Prague even said that the My building should be knocked down. Where do you stand on the treatment of socialist architecture? Is it being handled correctly, do you believe?
I would call it rather like a late modernist architecture than socialist architecture, because it then connects very much with the political era and not the architectural era. So in that respect, many of these buildings from the socialist time are very high quality modernist or late modernist architecture. Some of these were unfortunately built with the use of not very functional materials like asbestos, or I would say functional, yes, but not very healthy materials, or they were built on some urban planning assumptions or ideas that were not functioning very well. And that's a little bit a case of the building of Transgas, because its public space was very, very problematic. So I was not so much a critic of a building itself and its architecture. It was very, very nice and very state of the art to the time. But as a main entrance to the, I would say, most prestigious neighborhood of Vinohrady, to, let's say, artery, the Vinohradská street, it didn't work. It was like just dark, very, I would say, almost dangerous, very unpleasant space that it was creating on its ground floor, and it actually never worked much, the public space. So while the inside of the building it could be nice, but you see that it's a more complex thing. So with other buildings, like DBK, or there are plenty of these. I'm really signing petitions, and of course, so these are the masterpieces. Or Kotva department store, so these are the masterpieces of its time.
Getting back to you yourself, this year you ran for the Green Party in the European Parliament elections. You must have known there was very little chance you would get elected on the Greens ticket in Prague or in the Czech Republic. Why did you stand for the Greens?
I was always voting for Greens, and I don't really care if they get voted or not, because I like the program, So that's kind of a way how I perceive the world. I just follow my heart and my brain. So if people vote for the program or not, or if they support me or not, or the ideas basically that I'm trying to spread around. I was only number 5, so it was not a position on the candidates list to get voted. So I just said, yes, I will happily do it. I love your program. I think it's the best program based on the sustainable development that I believe in. I will happily do that.
Why do you think it is that there's so little interest in green politics in Czechia? Is it seen as a kind of luxury and not as important as, for example, jobs or cars or the car industry?
I would say there is an interest in the green politics. There is not so much interest in Green Party. The Green Party has its own history that was had up and downs, had some little bit weird figures, and they were in much better position, I would say, like some 15 years ago. Now they are pretty much down. But I don't think it's so much about that the society would not be interested in the green policies. In the same time, Czech Republic is heavily dependent on the car industry, and of course the car industry has a strong say in the politics, and it's widely interconnected with the politics. So when I, for example, or I would say the green politics, when we propose there should be more investments into the public transit, there should be more stress on the agenda of walkability of our cities, and more inclusive cities, that I think actually people understand what we say, but it goes a little bit against the interest of the industrial lobby, in a way.
Many of our listeners will know the surname Okamura in connection with your brother Tomio, who's the leader of this anti-EU, anti-migrant party, Freedom and Direct Democracy. Your oldest brother Hayato is also an MP for the Christian Democratic Party. There's many things I could probably ask you about Tomio, but there's one I would like to really ask you. Some people say that he doesn't even believe in the politics that he is espousing, that he didn't initially come out with this anti-migrant rhetoric. He was all about direct democracy, and then he got into the field of being basically far right because he thought it could be lucrative. And I'm really curious if you think he believes all the things that he says.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to say, because I'm definitely biased, and we have kind of an agreement with Tomio that we will not comment each other on the public media. But when you look at his history, you see that he was always a business person. He's very industrial, and he basically was in this travel agency business, and he was very successful. So if that answer kind of works for you, I would leave it there.
Okay, you have this agreement with him, but still, I'm curious: are there moments when he goes too far in your eyes? For example, in the summer when his party had these posters with this surgeon, so-called, with a knife, it was very racist, many people said. Also, he says other very inflammatory things. Are there times where there are tensions between you because of the things that he says?
Absolutely. There are moments we really have arguments. Sometimes there is some silence, or we just have some dispute over the phone. So there are things, yeah, of course. I think that some of the problems he's addressing are very important problems, and we should be aware of these problems, and we should work on these, such as migration, for example, and so on, and not try to avoid these problems. So, but in the same time, we have to look for the solutions that really work and are like functional in long term. I'm thinking he missed the history classes in the school. No, I'm really shocked, because I studied so much about, about the Second World War and the 30s and the Holocaust and so on. I some of the rhetorics, of course, and of the language is completely unacceptable for me.
When I was coming here to interview you, I was thinking about, I have two siblings also, and if one of my siblings headed a far-right party, and she was repeating Russian talking points on Ukraine, and she was a close associate of some of Europe's most, in my view, dangerous politicians like Marine Le Pen, I don't think we could be friends. I think you're a better person than me if you can be friends with Tomio.
We have such a long personal history with Tomio, of course, we grew up, he's just 1 year older than me, and somehow we were the closest siblings, and we also took care about our parents when they were really severely ill, and so there are some really existential moments where you can overcome these divides in political thinking, or our characters are quite different, in a way. So
also, your other brother, Hayato, he's a member of the Christian Democratic Party. He's an MP for them, and I presume he's against same-sex marriage. You're gay. Is that an issue for you, that he doesn't support your full rights, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, there are some policies with Hayato where we can easily agree, like this pro-European direction and so on. While that's something that maybe divides us a little bit, because he's like a really strong believer, I would say. He's very, very religious, and to him, this is something that is ultimately maybe given from the God, or I don't really know.
So he thinks you're a sinner because you're gay?
Pardon?
Does he think you're a sinner because you're gay?
I wouldn't say so. He accepts me, fully. I think that this is something that maybe is more connected with his political activities. I think he's much more progressive in a way than his colleagues from his party. But of course, when we speak of the politics and the voters and voters' preferences, he is definitely pushed to be more conservative, and I would understand it. But in the same time, he never told me anything like that is wrong. No, I never heard it a word from him. Like some you are gay, that's wrong. And it's a sin. No, never ever.
On a slightly lighter note, I guess, I was reading also that you were involved in the construction of Tomio's most unusual house, which looks like a kind of collection of tubes of different heights. Why did he have this unusual house built?
That house was widely disputed publicly in here, but there was not a real proper professional discussion in Czech Republic. And the house is designed by one of the best global architects, Christian Keres, who is the Swiss architect, and I advised my brother to hire him for his house. At the first moment, Tomio asked me to design his house, but because of the many activities you actually mentioned at the very beginning of our interview, I didn't have so much time to do that. I tried for 1 year almost, but it didn't work in the evenings and on the weekends. So I then said, if it's not me, why not thinking about a extraordinary approach to that? Like, why not to hire one of the best global architects? And My brother, he wanted something really that stands out. I can't really understand it because our family is kind of natural thing to stand out. I can't really do much about it. So it's like not, if you don't look like the other people, it's not so much, you are not really under the pressure to cope with that you don't really build a house like your neighbors, So it's similar like the Villa Tugendhat, when we compare it, that house, they also stood out in the time and was built by the Jewish family. And Christian, he came with a project. You might be surprised, but it's inspired by the favelas where he was born. It's brick structures that are kind of organically stitched together. It looks like it's built over the decades. Even this, of course, in this case of South America, it's so, but in Prague, it's not like that. But it took almost 1 decade to build a house. That's true, because of the construction permits, because it's very difficult to fit into the regulations with a house that consists of 15 or 16 tubes and doesn't have, I would say, the typical roof and the attic floor, and we really got stuck with the definition of attic floor. What does it mean when you have just tubes, But the project got really published worldwide. It was on the cover pages of many magazines, like in Switzerland, Germany, Italy, Japan, of course. It was everywhere. I would say it's the most famous, globally famous house from Czech Republic from the last 2 decades, for sure.
Wow, I did not know that. My final question for you, Osamu. It's not really a question, but it's interesting to me. You are a listener of Radio Prague International.
Yes, and I'm a big fan of. I listen to Radio Prague International every morning. Yeah, it's my breakfast ritual. Yeah, I'm just listening to BBC, Radio Prague. And of course, the interviews are the most favorite part of it for me. These interviews with interesting people who have some international experience.
Many thanks indeed to Osamu Okamura for that interview and for being such an enthusiastic listener of our programme. I spoke to Osamu in November 2024 for Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. And if you're new to the pod and enjoyed this chat, why not look up some of the 100 plus earlier editions and subscribe wherever you get podcasts. But for me, Ian Willoughby, that's all for now. Thanks a million for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.